What's possible when we imagine and we remember and we dream and we tune into what we long for? What is the world we long to live in? What is the relationship we long to experience within ourselves, in our relationships with women, and as a culture? What's possible if we question and we find new ways?
Welcome back, friends, to Questions Men Ask, the podcast for men just like you, men who are breaking out of the mold of conventional masculinity, breaking out of the conditioning that they were brought up within, who are looking for new possibilities, new opportunities in their lives. You're in exactly the right place. I'm John Symes. I'm a teacher and a speaker and a writer here in California. I'm co-hosting with my good friend, Jared Archbold. Hi, Jared.
Hello, John.
Yeah, welcome aboard. We will today be diving into the question about what else is possible. And the context for that is that we've been looking at the shape that we've been poured into as men and the shape of our culture. And we're saying, is that how it has to be? Is anything else possible instead? And if so, what might it be? It's a great conversation and we're glad you're here to join us in it. Thanks for being here. Hey, Jared, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you, John?
I'm really excited for the conversation we're going to have today.
Awesome.
So we're going to have a conversation about what else is possible. We've been on this wonderful journey of looking at where we are and how we got here. What else is possible? And that's a conversation about things that have been obscured by ignorance and folly. You know, we've not been able to see what's possible because we're so stuck in what is.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take us through a few different spaces that we're going to explore together. What's different, what's possible for us ourselves as men, what's possible instead of what we have in our relating with other people, be that with our friends or family, our lovers. And we're going to look at the biggest picture of all, what's possible, what's possible instead of what we have in terms of the balance between men and women in the culture writ large, in the global scale picture of the human family. You ready for that?
I'm excited. Let's jump in.
Okay. And I want to encourage you and listeners everywhere to activate 3 different muscles. And the muscles I want you to activate for this conversation are the power of your imagination. We're going to go into the realm of imagining what could be. Simultaneously, I want to encourage you into the realm of remembering. That place where you can tap into what knowledge and wisdom is already stored in your body, in your DNA, in your lineage. I don't actually mind how you refer to it, but you, Jared, and you, dear listener, have a deep knowing. I want you to tap into that. And we're also going to reference that which is visible to us that lies outside our mainstream culture. And so that might be what we know about, what we've witnessed, and what we've experienced in visiting with peoples untouched or largely untouched by this culture. That might mean indigenous people. It might mean people in what are cutely called the countries of the developing world. It might be simply communities that have opted out of the mainstream culture that we live within. What can we learn from the places that are outside of the water that we're swimming in every day? So with those 3 ways of thinking, let's go into our first conversation. What's possible instead of the way it is for us individually as men? What's possible for us as men that we don't allow or doesn't seem possible, doesn't seem within our capacity right now? How could life be for you, dear listener, if it weren't for the way things are, the conditioning that you lived through, all that shaped you? How else could it be? What do you not allow yourself to do because you're preoccupied with being a man or looking like a man, sounding like a man? What do you not allow yourself to do, or how do you not allow yourself to be? Jared, what have you got to tell us about those? And I say that without any irony. I'm really interested in your experience because I know you're a man that's pushing at boundaries in different places. You've been a very self-aware explorer of the space of being a man. And what do you think is possible instead of the mold? What's the alternative once we loosen the mold, break out from it?
Yeah. I mean, what comes to mind first is freedom. The freedom to live beyond the constraints of the mold, beyond the constraints of the wounding and the grief that comes along with that. Um, in my own journey, I have been doing a lot of healing, and then there's this amazing opening on the other side of each wound I work with and heal, and all this wisdom that comes from that process. And I mean, it's like magic. And then on the other side, it's like I regain a piece of myself. The light shines through me in a much brighter and more beautiful way. I mean, for lack of a better word, and it's freeing. It's realizing like, oh, I'm constrained in this way, and oftentimes that can come as a surprise. It's like, oh wow, you turn over a rock and you're like, oh, that's there, huh? Um, so that's what comes to mind first, as far as like as an individual, is I like beginning to become aware of where I'm limited, where I'm held back, um, and what I can do about it that creates freedom, which is the core desire of the masculine is freedom to release constraint. So that's what's on the surface for me.
I was talking to a guy just yesterday. He was potentially coming to me for some support, and I asked him to describe where he was. He said, "Well, he said for the past few months, I've just been taking the armor off." And he was metaphorically describing the process of taking off all of the layers that he'd accumulated psychically to protect him from the world, to keep the world out. And a very appropriately male metaphor that he was using to describe that process of, as you say, moving towards a freedom. Yeah, I think there's a tremendous freedom available to us if we were not worried about appearing to fit into the mold of the man the way the culture has it. I think there are all sorts of ways of expressing ourselves, the way we might speak, act, move, the way we might dress, um, all very relevant to me right now. You know, and I could tell you, I'm experimenting with growing out my hair. My hair is longer now than it's been for at least 20, maybe as many as 40 years, and it just seems like something I want to do. It's like, what would happen if I let my hair grow? And I know that there was an unspoken agreement inside the men of my family that we'd keep our hair short,
Yeah.
and I'm challenging that. So I think
Yeah.
whether that freedom will look good or not, we'll find out. But it's a freedom to try.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
certainly a
And to
freedom to
change your
try.
mind at some point if that comes
Yeah,
up.
I could change my mind and reverse the process. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what else is possible? Is a greater degree of freedom. Let's name what some of those freedoms might look like. How could you be more free or less constrained? What would it look like for you, Jared?
Mm.
To anything that comes to mind around that.
Yeah, I love, you named expression. That's a big one, but I also like the freedom to love and to share your love, like to express my love. As I heal my wounds, as I release shame, I have so much more access and confidence in sharing how much I love my people and expressing that with them. Um, and like realizing how constrained I was in those ways not that long ago. And it's very sweet to be able to do that. So expressing love, being of service, being able to free up enough space to expand my awareness and check in on the people around me and be like, oh, well, how, like now that I've handled some things for me and I've got this space to breathe, like, okay, well, where else can my gifts be of service and support people and invest in my community and my family and things like that. That's another
Yeah,
beautiful one.
yeah. I'm struck by the way I can, or I do, and have certainly constrain myself from doing things which are might appear feminine,
Hmm.
or we had the word, I don't you don't hear the word very much these days, but effeminate,
Hmm.
looking like a woman, I suppose that means. We're going to come back to that one in a little bit because I think the masculine and feminine are fascinating areas to explore, and we've got that coming in a
Yeah.
moment or two. So the quest for freedom. So what's possible instead of for you, for me, for our listeners, is living a more free life, being able to unashamedly express who we are, being able to display traits which aren't completely aligned with traditional male roles.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else you want to add into that piece? Anything we can learn from other cultures, or anything you remember in your bones
Hmm.
about what's possible for you as a man, unconstrained by the modern culture?
Yeah. The other thing that just came to mind is the opportunity to take responsibility and to apologize. That like when you say like the constraints of like traditional male roles, and I think about older generations of men, there wasn't a lot of that. It was seen as weak to admit a mistake, to take responsibility for impacts on other people, to apologize, to clean up your mess. And I'm present to that when we really look at what's possible, when we really look at what's needed from us as men. I think because we're in this balancing between male men and women right now, that what's a lot of what's needed is taking responsibility. Whether it was us individually, like me as Jared, that made a mess, or it's stepping up and taking responsibility for men. Like, I am a man, I benefit from shitty things people did, and who else is going to do it? And the openings that creates, and that's deeply inspiring for me. It's not easy in any way, but yeah, I'm really moved by that, the opportunity to step up and say, we made a mess and we're sorry.
Yeah, shout out to my buddy Steve, who's been pioneering that for the last few years. I know I've been in spaces with him, especially in mixed spaces groups, where he's taken the initiative to offer an apology from him, sometimes on behalf of other men, but from him for the ways that he and other men have treated women and the damage that's been done by that. So Steve's a great example of somebody who feels that sense of responsibility and wants to act on it. Yes, yes, yes. Let's shift our focus to the realm of relationship, and again asking the same kind of questions. What's possible instead? So if you were more free, if you took more responsibility, if you were free of the mold that you were poured into as a boy and were able to take whatever shape you want to now as a man, how would relationships show up? How could they show up for you, Jared, for us as men? And that's relationships that might be family, friendship relationships, even romantic and sexual relationships. Let's put them all in the same category. How could we relate differently?
The word that comes up for me at that question is intimacy is possible, like depth of relationship. When we take our armor off and we feel things, one of the things we can start to feel is empathy. We have much greater emotional understanding and sensitivity, and that can really supports deeper intimacy, being, and again, that space that comes from the healing of the individual, of ourselves, creates space to be able to be curious and interested in what's going on there, and also letting go of that mold of like, well, men are an island. Men, they go to work and they get the job done and they provide and they protect, and that's it. And it's letting go of that and just be like, no, like, I have a heart. I love my people. I want to go deeper. I don't want to have the limits of my father and grandfathers of being in that role, and just having a very thin layer of relationship with their children, with their partner, with other men. Yeah, in the last few years, as I've done more healing and really opened and been able to have deeper relationships with men and deeper friendships, which is something I know a lot of men suffer from the lack of. Oh, it's so nourishing to be able to not only be to have deeper friendships with men, but to support other men and to have them support me when I need it. And that's something that showed up in our relationship. Like that I'm able to share stuff that's going on for me. That's sometimes it's great and it's exciting and we can celebrate together. But sometimes it's like, oh man, I'm in it right now. I need some help. Like, can I just share my story with you? Um, and it makes a massive difference and leads to deeper intimacy.
Yeah. I think what you're saying is allowing ourselves to be vulnerable
Hmm.
around each other,
Absolutely.
allowing ourselves to accept that we have and demonstrate the emotions that run through us. And we've been trained. I certainly was trained that that wasn't particularly how you operated, and so it's been a stretch to develop the capacity to do that in relationship in my adult years. And I'm glad that it has. And I suspect this is a continual process. There's always more of ourselves to find and bring ourselves truly, authentically, and transparently into relationship. Yeah. Is there anything about relationship that we might learn from other cultures? Is there anything that might be living in you or me or our listeners from our ancient history about how we as men relate with other people? Is really vibrant, enjoyable, platonic relationship between adults, men and women, without us having to infer that there is anything other than platonic friendship. We seem to see sexual relationship as such an important part of assessing relationship. It's difficult, it leaves a difficult space for purely platonic relationships. But how much joy is there to be had in the company of women without any contamination by the thought of, is there a subtext here? Is there not? And that would be a joy, and it would be different. It would be different from how things are at the moment, where our culture is so sexualized that we're inferring that's a part of every relationship. So that
Yeah.
occurs to me. Yeah.
Yeah, let me run with that thread. On the flip side of that too is that our sexual relationships can be free of a lot of the puritanical box that sexuality has lived in for a very long time, the ways it has been suppressed and morphed and shows up in these really unhealthy ways. That what can be possible in relationship is also like really beautiful, sacred, nourishing, expressive sex. And that the health that that can bring, the ways that the symptoms of not having that can lessen, which gives rise to being able to have beautiful platonic relationships because we're getting what we need, we're getting what we long for in those arenas where we are able to have this really nourishing sexual relationship both with ourselves and with partners. And then we can kind of like see straight.
Yes.
We can actually be available for something other than that or the subtext of trying to achieve that with everyone we meet.
Yeah, that's lovely, because there's so much coding that lies on top of who you choose to be intimate with, and
Yeah,
whether it's good, uh, whether it's good and appropriate,
yeah,
or it's not.
exactly.
Yeah, good spot. I like that piece.
Yeah,
So there are some ways in which relationship could be very different for us.
yeah,
So we can imagine, here we are imagining that something else is entirely possible for us as men in the realm of relationship as well. So let's switch to the third part of this exploration, and that's the exploration as to how the relationship between men and women, and I'm going to say masculine and feminine things, could be if we imagined it to be different from how it is. We're out of balance. We can say it that simply. We're out of balance, and we're imagining it's possible to come back into balance. Let's dive into that and what that looks like. what's under that particular lid for you, Jared?
Yeah, and I feel the need to break it down a little bit of what we're actually talking about when we talk about masculine and feminine and men and women, and that we're actually describing two different things. Um, that masculine and feminine being these archetypes of energies, and that um, they're not one or the other. There's a spectrum, um, and that men and women embody different ends of that spectrum at different times, and that men contain both masculine and feminine energy. Women contain both masculine and feminine energy, and we each, in as a culture and individually, express the blend of those in unique ways. So we'll kind of that gives us some context for this conversation. And what I see as possible, what I have seen as possible in myself, and we've discussed this in our own ways and in our relationships. I think what's really possible is releasing the constraints that being a man has to mean being masculine, and that any feminine energy expressed in a man is inherently weak or wrong or something like that, or that a woman expressing masculine energy and qualities and gifts, which we often see that kind of friction in the workplace when women adopt masculine gifts to adapt into a workspace and to be able to succeed in that workplace. Then she is given, she is criticized for it.
Help
um
us. I love where this
yeah,
is going, but help us and our listeners, please, to understand what you mean by masculine energies
yeah,
in the workplace, and conversely, what are feminine energies. So let's look just for that moment
yeah,
on how these appear.
yeah. And I will say that this is my personal interpretation of these archetypes. I am in no way saying this is true, because they're archetypes and they are an agreed upon understanding. Um, my understanding of masculine being the archetype of the sun, of light, of vision, of being able to see with clarity. I see masculine as a gift of the masculine being like one who can hold structure, who can hold a container for important and beautiful things to happen within. um, masculine energy and a masculine gift is one of purpose that comes with that clarity. We can see, the masculine can see the destination and can see the path to arrive at that destination. And as we mentioned earlier, like the deep masculine desire of freedom, of removing constraint and breaking through to the other side to freedom. So that's masculine. Feminine being the archetype of the night and darkness, and when the moon and the deep connection between the moon and the feminine. It's a much more mysterious and mercurial energy. You can never quite just put your finger on it and define it in any one moment. The feminine is deeply moved by emotion and love and beauty, and is deeply inspired to express that in life. Um, and the feminine is deeply moved by relationship and connection and community and building beautiful relationship in both the individual level, family level, and community level. So there's kind of a little bit of a caricature of each of my understanding of the archetypes.
Yeah, and um, I love the image of the trellis and the rose.
Yeah,
Although I'm not sure it gives full justice to the way you just described the energies, which I think was super clear. But in the trellis and the rose, and we've got one on our in our yard right now. You know, we have a wooden trellis that's set up, and it's a series of slats, and a rose growing up and winding her way around that structure and the solid strength, which in obviously in our parallel is masculine energy, and the rose is the growth of and movement of feminine energy. So I'm struck by that as one way of encapsulating those two ideas. So fabulous. So with those ideas encapsulated, what's possible instead of what we have at the moment, where I would argue we're badly out of balance. That men are discarding their feminine self, women are learning to step into their masculine energy in a way because it's functional in the world that's built around the expression of that energy. We've got the overheating of the entire planet and the contamination of our waters. You can think about that in masculine and feminine terms. So we're definitely out of balance right now. What is it that's possible instead of the imbalance that we've got?
Yeah, I mean, I think the beginning is accepting that we're different, accepting that we each bring different gifts to the table. And one of the ways we can do that is accepting that we contain those energies within ourselves. I think for men, and I'm speaking personally, one of the biggest learning journeys I've been on is questioning these cultural conditioning structures of what it looks like to be a man and how a man expresses. And largely that has looked like being masculine, only be masculine, like maybe a little bit of feminine, but mostly you really got to stay in the masculine lane. Um, and so that sets me up, it sets us up to then have this kind of like almost competitive, or like, this is me, this you're you, and we're different, and we're not going to really be able to mesh very well or understand each other, or I'm not going to be able to find compassion for another as a woman who's embodying feminine energy. You see this in the war of the sexes, of like men being so frustrated that women won't be more logical, and women being so frustrated that men are just trying to solve all the problems and don't understand that they feel things, and that those feelings are valid and need to be like understood and received. And that they're, the masculine way of doing things, and especially being in a very male dominated world, like has become the quote unquote right way. And that the feminine way is, it's too circuitous. I think that's the word. Like, yeah, it's not direct enough. It's not gonna, we don't have time for that, or we don't have time to tend to people's feelings. And I've seen this like in workplaces. Some of these thoughts have come out of my mouth, and then luckily I've had incredible women and other men be like check me on that. Like, really? Is that really the best way to do it? Or is it just the way you think is the best way to do it based on your embodiment of these energies? So it's a beautiful learning journey. And I think that's really how we're going to bring more balance, is accepting it within ourselves, which allows us to honor and appreciate the contrast when it comes to women and comes to these other forms of energy.
Yeah, accepting and honoring. I think of those are two really core words there, Jared. And we get to a place where we might imagine that what we're seeking is equality and there between men and women. And I suspect there's a little bit of a hidden trap in the word, that we very often think that means we'll end up in a place where men and women look the same and do the same and act the same. And I don't think that's what true equality is. I think equality is a space in which it's okay to be exactly who you are, and it's equally okay for all of us to be exactly who we are. And the way we bring ourselves, the way we express ourselves in the world is equally valid, equally accepted, equally honored. And therefore, when we have women rising into power in organizations and governments, they don't need to be playing inside the male set of rules. And we've talked about this before, but I always think of Margaret Thatcher. Those are younger listeners might not know, but she was the first female prime minister in the UK. She wore trousers better than any of the men that she worked with. She was the first woman there, but she didn't bring an ounce of femininity or feminine wisdom, feminine perspective. She was playing in a set of rules that were created by men for the benefit of men, and she just happened to do that better than the other men around at the same time. But to have a woman in power was not the same as us benefiting from the perspective and wisdom that women have access to, which needs, I think, to be wholly accepted, fully honored, and amplified into our world. I'm also struck by the fact that we don't have to have an answer for this question, because for uh, thousands of years we have lived in an imbalance. So much so that we have no very little recorded history of non-patriarchal cultures. And so what's needed today is our imagination. And imagination says we don't necessarily have the answers, but we can dream into what it might be like. We can dream into what it might be like if my daughter was able to grow up with all the advantages that her brother enjoys in the world. We can imagine what it would be like if women had throughout the world had access to the same opportunities and resources that are directed towards boys in our culture. Yeah. So let our imagination run free with this one. We are dreaming a new world into existence. The current dream doesn't work. The old dreams might be so far back that we don't actually feel enough direction from them. So let our future be shaped by the dreams we have now. Everything else is possible. We have tremendous agency as human beings. We have some of the capacities we've learned as we've grown as a culture are terrific. The ways we can combine the efforts of multiple people, hundreds, thousands of people in different locations around the world in a common project. The capacity to organize on that scale, organize human effort on that scale to ensure a vision is created is staggering. There's nothing that we can't do. I'm not sure I completely mean that. There's an enormous amount we can do when we apply ourselves to this challenge. So if we started this episode with the question, what else is possible? We see that individually we've got the possibility for tremendous amounts of freedom, and freedom to express ourselves, freedom then in relationship with others, freedom to be vulnerable, to recognize emotion, to be able to be intimate in all the different ways that is. That's going to lead us into deeper relationships. And there's a different balance for us to find between men and women, and between the, as you say, the archetypal forces of the feminine and the masculine in our
Mm-hmm.
culture. So
And
it's
yeah, just
everything to play for.
yeah, and just dreaming on like what will it look like when both the masculine and feminine are equally honored and can play together and offer the gifts of each to each other in service. I just yeah, like I don't even it's hard to even wrap my head around how beautiful that will be. And I have my own examples of that in my own relationship with my wife and other people I'm in, and in myself, in the way that those energies are finding ways to find their own balance together and work together and create these beautiful new expressions in the world. So as you're speaking all of this, I'm just like I'm struck and kind of giddy at the beauty that's possible, and makes me more curious about like, okay, like how do we do that? How do we bring that out?
Yeah. Yeah. In the last episode, we ended up seeing how this is an age of questioning. And and most of us as listeners are in a space of questioning. And so it seems this conversation today has demonstrated what a fertile space that is. That actually all sorts of new and different can arise in this space. And that underscores one of the other assumptions that we've carried throughout this podcast, is that we have agency. We have agency to shift what's happening in our own lives. We have agency to change how relationships are with other people in our lives. We have agency to act in a way which will ripple out of vision beyond the line of sight of the people that are touched by the things we do. Let's not forget that agency. So how would it be if our next episode was about how do we make a shift? How do we make a shift in
Sounds like a great idea.
ourselves?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how do we put into action that which we are experimenting with? How do we bring the vision that we might get, the dreams that we might find? How do we bring them into expression? How do we do the work to break free? That movement towards freedom, as you say, is mostly an inside job. And how would we take on doing that inside job? So we could have an episode dedicated to what are we going to do next as a result of all of this questioning.
Which is deeply satisfying for my masculine. And I imagine it is for a lot of our listeners. Like, great, where do we get started? What's the to-do list? Let's get to work. Let's fix this thing. I'm ready to be free of this.
Have we just fallen into a trap?
I mean, or we're just riding the wave.
Oh dear. I love it. I love it. So in a nutshell, what's this episode been about? What's this episode in a nutshell?
Yeah. What's possible when we imagine and we remember and we dream and we tune into what we long for? What is the world we long to live in? What is the relationship we long to experience within ourselves, in our relationships with women, and as a culture? What's possible if we question and we find new ways?
And I would suggest that the answer is a whole beautiful array of new expression is possible when we ask that question and commit to change. In a nutshell, everything's possible. So that's us for this week. Thank you for being here. What a fabulous conversation. Thanks, Jared. That's just been really nourishing for me, that conversation. We hope it's been nourishing for you too. We thank you for being here. A reminder, if you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you found it. Like us and share. We'd love you to bring other men and maybe even women into this conversation as well. Anybody who's interested in the topics that we're discussing here. We'd also love to hear your questions. In a couple of episodes' time, we're going to devote an entire episode to answering the questions that are coming in from you guys. So send us in anything that's top of mind for you. And then we would invite you as well to come to the drop-in that we host once a month. It's a free Zoom call. You can come in with your questions or answers that you might have to questions that we've been addressing here in the podcast. It's a free event. Come and join us there. We look forward to seeing you. Most of all, thanks for listening.